Hi, Margot. Here we are with Margot Lee Shetterly, the famous author of Hidden Figures, which later became a famous movie in Hollywood. And it talks about a group of very smart African American women that worked at NASA and calculated like the trajectory of spaceships. And well, it's a great book. I would really recommend it. So we would love to know a lot about your book. And so can I ask you a few questions?
Yeah, and thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. And it's really nice to be with you today, Shimi.
Okay, so I want to know why you wrote it. What inspired you to write it?
So, well, I actually grew up in Hampton, Virginia, where the story takes place. And my dad, who's retired now, he spent his whole career at NASA, at that NASA center as a research scientist. So I knew the women growing up. But I knew them as sort of, people in the neighborhood, and they were my friends' moms or grandmothers, really. They were the grandmother's age. And I started working on the book in 2012. And this was, I'm sorry, 2010 now. It's like thinking it's a long time ago. And this was actually, we were home. Aaron, my husband, whom you know, your dad's friend, we were visiting my parents in Virginia. And my dad was talking about some of the women who had done this work and Katherine Johnson. And Aaron was like, oh, I've never heard this story before. And it was sort of like this one moment of seeing that something that I had known from growing up was actually could be very interesting to other people. And that I was curious because I didn't know the whole story.
Wow, that's really interesting. What do you think your book how do you think that your book impacted on the world? Like what do you think were the major it's a very famous book and it's very important in that. Well, what do you think are the impacts that it caused?
Impacts. Well, it's really interesting because people are still asking me to speak. So the book came out in 2016. Now it's 2022, right? That's 6 years. Long time. And I never would have imagined that people would have such interest for such a long time. But I think one of the reasons why is that we're still very interested in the role that women play in the STEM fields, in science, technology, math, engineering. And so it's a really interesting story to look back on where we were in the 1960s in terms of the workforce, where we are today and where we might be in 20 years or 30 years, and try and learn some lessons from the past in order to get us where we want to be in the future. I think that's a big part of it. I think that, people love a good story, so that one of the other impacts has been for people to say, hey, just because a story is a story that only I know, and it might be about my grandmother, about the person who lived down the block, doesn't mean it's not also a really good story. That, I think it's sort of gotten people to think of history as something that happens to the people they know, or that, that history is comprised of the people that they know, and not just famous people. I think that's another one of the things. That it sort of, and those trends were already happening. I think it really just came along at a time when people were very interested in those things. And it benefited a lot from that momentum, and from the hard work that people have been doing for decades, for example, in trying to get more women, more underrepresented groups in the technology fields. People have been working very hard for a long time on that. And it just happened that, I think Hidden Figures came around at the right time to capture a lot of that momentum.
Yeah. And I have a question. Are you working on any other books at the moment and maybe related to the subject or anything like that?
I am. That's a very good question. I am, in fact, working on a new book that, I started thinking about Hidden Figures as the first in a series of books that really took place in the 20th century, because I'm very interested in that time period, and have to do with Black professional people, and this sort of looking at them and their careers and their work and their families and what they wanted out of the 20th century, the changes that happened with the civil rights movement, and a lot of these things in the middle of the 20th century. So the current book that I'm working on focuses on a group of entrepreneurs, business people, which is, my dad is a scientist.
Recording.
And so Hidden Figures really wrote about that group of people. But my work was always, after I came out of college, was always as a business person and in finance and, entrepreneurship. And, that's how I met your dad, because I worked at his company. So I'm really interested to write about these people whose jobs are a lot more directly connected to the jobs that I've had in my career. So I'm still working on it. It'll probably come out next year.
And when did you like figure out that you were going to become a writer? Like, when was it that you were like, hey, you know what? I want to become a writer. When did you notice that you just wanted to write?
Writing is something that I've always done and I've always enjoyed. And the reason why, so Aaron, my husband, and I, when we went to Mexico, it was to start a magazine. And so that was a very interesting time, because part of my job was business and running the business and figuring out, like, how do we sell advertising? How do we hire people? All of that. Part of it was the writing, and what do we create that can be interesting to this group of English language speakers who live in Mexico, because that's who the people are that were reading the magazine. And so that, and I had worked in other jobs that had to do with writing, but really writing the book Hidden Figures turned me into a full-time writer. Like, if you'd asked me before then what my job was, I wouldn't have said writer, but now I do. Really, now I consider myself a writer first. And you still need to use some of those other skills of being a business person and things like that. But right now, if you had to ask me what was the moment when I really became a writer, it was probably the moment when I held the first copy of Hidden Figures in my hand.
And do you think that, like, for example, like before you wrote it, like, did you think, I think this is great? Or were you were you like, what were your feelings publishing the book? Like, what did you think?
Well, I loved the research. The research is still one of my favorite parts. I love the writing too. The writing is hard work, and it's work that you do by yourself, and it's easy to sort of get discouraged, but you just, it's like anything else, you just have to keep doing it. Um, but I think it was like, wow, I've never done this before. It felt like, okay, there were times when I always felt like I would finish it. But there were a lot of times when I felt like I didn't really know what I was doing, and I just sort of jump out over the cliff and hope I'd sprout wings and fly. And that happened, which was great. So as opposed to this book, I've done it before, so I do know I can do it. And it's really a matter of trying to do it better, trying to do it more efficiently, which is probably not something that happens with writing. And I have a little bit less of the anxiety of doing something for the first time. But there was definitely, for me, with Hidden Figures, the anxiety of doing something for the first time.
Was it hard to become was there parts where you were saying, like, did you ever feel really like discouraged writing it, any book? Like, did you ever feel like very close to like saying, you know what, maybe not, because right now.
Never, not, never, maybe not, never. It was not, even when it was really hard, it just felt like, okay, I just have to keep going. And at some point it will be done. And it was, but there were definitely times when I was like, wow, I've really taken on a task that is so much bigger than I expected it to be. And but on the other hand, I think that is when you get the biggest satisfactions, when you don't know you can do something, or you're not sure how to do something, and you just sort of get up every day and do it. And one day it's done, and you learn all kinds of things that you didn't realize you were learning at the time, not just the thing itself, but about how to do something that's difficult, about trying to stay calm instead of panic when it's really hard. There are all kinds of things that it was an incredible experience and an incredible lesson for me to write the book.
And lastly, Margot, is there anything you would like to tell us, like something maybe that you live by, something that helps you like keep on writing, or something that like a quote or something like that that you like?
Um, well, I'm when I think about what I'm doing right now, and it's sort of a hard thing, right? This thing of writing, it's weird because you do it by yourself. It's very solitary work. And you have to create your own energy to move forward. And it really helps because Erin's a writer as well. So we can like give each other energy and tips and things like that. But when you're sitting there with the computer and you're trying to write, it's really just you and your thoughts and your research and this idea that you have of this book that you want to put on the page. And I think people talk a lot about writing and how what you need to do to write. And I think really if there is a secret, it's that you have to write until the book is done. And then you have to rewrite the book until the book is good. It's that's it. Like it's sort of like running a race or anything that's really hard, that a lot of the success comes in just getting up and doing it every day.
Thank you so much, Margot. Thank you so much for taking the time. That was so interesting. That was that was really, really interesting.
Thank you. It was really good to talk to you, and I really enjoyed our interview.
Me too. Hold on, I'm gonna